I'll make a start just to welcome, while people are still connecting to audio, just to welcome you to this Tapas lunchtime seminar. So thank you for joining us. As I say every time, Tapas is an open network funded by the Natural Environment Research Council, and we're very pleased to have you join our seminar series and other activities that we engage in with Tapas. Just a couple of housekeeping remarks. First, please, while you're on the call, while the speakers are speaking, please keep your cameras off and yourself muted. This is recorded, and the talk will be placed on our website eventually. And please put questions to our speakers in the chat, and we'll deal with those at the end of the talk. So it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers today. We have two, Rowan Ryrie, who is a co-founder of Parents for Future UK, helped establish two of the biggest global networks of parent and intergenerational climate activists. She's a lawyer with experience working on international environmental and human rights law, and believes passionately in the power of parents for change. And she's going to be joined by Claire Larkin, one of the co-founders of Parents for Future Scotland, who is a fundraiser for charities working with disadvantaged communities and has done so for about 15 years. So it's a great pleasure to have both Rowan and Claire talk. Rowan's going to start, and the topic of their conversation, which is very relevant to what we're trying to do with Tapas at the moment, is engaging parents as part of school communities. So over to you, Rowan.
Thank you very much. It's really nice to get to talk about this, which is something we think about a lot and don't get to dive into in detail as often as we'd like. So thank you for having us and for the invitation. Claire, do you want to click through onto the next slide? So Paul's introduced us briefly already. Claire is working on this in the Parents for Future work in Scotland. I work across the UK and also across the global parent climate organising work. So Paul mentioned that I'm one of the co-founders of Parents for Future UK. I'm also a co-founder, well, I was involved in helping to set up Parents for Future Global, and a fellowship programme where we connect emerging leaders from the parent and intergenerational climate movements globally. And I'm very happy to talk a bit more about what the global work looks like. Some of that comes up later in the talk, but if that's interesting, please do ask some questions. I'm very happy to delve into that. Claire, do you want to just introduce yourself a little bit more expansively?
Yeah, so hi, I'm Claire. I am based in Glasgow. As Paul said, I co-founded Parents for Future Scotland. I have 3 young children, aged 3, 6 and 9, and I work for a play therapy organisation, part-time, doing funding applications for them. And yeah, I think over lockdown, I wasn't particularly worried about climate issues, but then over lockdown, I kind of realised that that was due to lack of biodiversity, that actually climate issues are really impacting people right here and right now, and that nobody's really going to do anything about it unless we do something ourselves. And so then I've worked tirelessly every spare moment I've had to try and kind of progress climate issues to become kind of a normal topic of conversation amongst parents, and for parents to be able to feel their own power and do something about it without needing to be experts. Because I think if we all need to be experts, then we're done for.
Thanks, Claire. So as Claire said, the inspiration for the parent climate work is often really personal. It's that moment of realization, of realizing that your children's future, our children's future, and collectively all of our children's futures are going to be affected by the climate crisis, that's going to be something that defines part of their life experience. Personally, part of my story, so as Paul mentioned, I'm trained as a human rights and environmental lawyer and worked in legal spaces in various ways for about 10 years. But I had never worked on climate until 2018, and 2019. In 2018, my eldest daughter started school. And that relationship between climate and school was really important for me, because that was a moment when I felt like I lifted my head out of the trenches of early parenthood, when you're very much working day to day, often minute to minute, and just trying to kind of get through all of the decisions you need to make as a parent, and started to think longer term. So making the decisions about what was going to be the right education for my daughter, and then what life she was going to live, what her future might look like, and what skills she might need to engage in the world. And then looking at what the climate crisis and the scientific evidence is saying, that the world that she's going to live in is likely to be radically different from the one I grew up in, and the expectations that she's going to have of her future are very different to kind of when I was a child or when my parents were children. And so thinking about that kind of link between parenthood and needing to make decisions long term drew me to thinking about the climate crisis, and that there's, for me, a very natural role for parents thinking about protecting our children from the climate crisis and making long-term decisions about their future, which I think is something that's really inherent in parenting. My actual engagement in climate organising was inspired very much by the youth strike movement, and that's true of many people that are part of the parent climate movement internationally as well as across the UK. So in 2019, the youth strike movement that had been started by Greta in 2018 really came to the UK. And that's a moment that I think probably all of us will remember. But we suddenly saw youth activists out on the streets. We suddenly had this amazing wave of energy of people taking action, and people kind of stepping out of their comfort zone and going and doing something that they hadn't previously thought of doing, whether that was protesting or striking from school. And for me, seeing youth activists and young people who are often quite terrified of speaking in public, willing to step out of their comfort zone and go and do that, made me feel that I, as a parent, should also be willing to take those sorts of risks and should be willing to step up alongside them. So these are all photos from the youth strike, very early youth strike actions. And I think they kind of encapsulate really well what we're trying to do with a lot of the parent climate organising, of keeping our kids safe, supporting youth activists and supporting their voices, and thinking about what is our children's story and what's the legacy that we want to leave as parents. Do you want to move on, Claire? Thank you. So since 2019, this work has grown really significantly. These are a very few photos from pieces that I've been involved with. But we've now got work that's happening across the world with different parts of parent climate organising that looks different in different contexts. And across the UK, we've got a combination of campaigning work and local organising that I'll talk about in a little bit more detail in a minute. These photos are from various protests and actions that we've done. And at the top there, we've got COP26, where we had some meetings with Alok Sharma. We've got actions in London at various protests and outside the Department for Business and Energy and Net Zero. I can never remember its latest name, where we've been doing lots of actions about energy security and trying to encourage the transition to renewables. Lots of these photos are very protest-based. I've got a couple of photos coming up on schools engagement, but the protests is where we tend to have more photos. So we're trying to make sure that we increase the photos that we take so that we can represent some of the softer, more community-focused schools engagement work. But people tend to have cameras and phones out at protests more. We've also had lots of success in getting media coverage. We're wanting to do more and get the parent voice out into media more effectively and be able to use our voices as parents. And that's a piece that we're going to be working on more kind of second half of this year. But it's been great starting to see more parent voices in the media talking about climate and our care for the climate as parents. And starting to get a bit more diversity in some of that representation has been really important. And that's something that we're continuing to work on, is to get a more diverse group of voices talking about climate and environmental issues. We have done some work in schools very early in the parent climate organising work. So in 2019, back in those heady pre-pandemic days, we organised work in schools where we had people organising activities at school fairs across the country, which was really effective to start to take political engagement and political and climate conversations into spaces where people don't expect it, but to go and meet parents where they are And that's always felt really important, is to find ways to bring climate conversations into spaces where parents are already engaging, which is generally much more effective than trying to pull parents into a climate space. And then we've also done work of getting school children and parents writing letters and postcards to politicians. And we've done quite a bit of that work. Those ones on the left, I think, were from 2019, 2020, where we had children writing postcards to their local MPs and also to the Prime Minister. And importantly, at the top there, I think schools are a space where parents have unique power. Obviously, school communities are not made up just of parents, the students and the teachers, but we see a lot of the climate engagement work that's happening through schools at the moment tends to focus on trying to engage teachers and trying to engage school governors and trying to engage the kind of the official bodies of the school, and often really overlooks the parents. But parents are a really important part of school communities, and parents also have a really granular understanding of each specific school, of how you can go and engage in a specific school, of who might be the allies, what might be the language to use, what might be an approach to try and engage in that school, and what might be opportunities that it would be possible to approach that school with. And I think that level of kind of granular understanding is really important, and is a space where parents can bring that. Also, I think it's important to remember how stretched schools and teachers are. And so when you're trying to approach teachers and ask them to think about climate engagement, parents can often be a resource that teachers can lean on. Parents have got an ability to put some energy into this, and lots of the parents that we're working with are very keen to engage through schools communities. So there's a kind of resource there of parent time to draw on, potentially, to help some of the schools engagement be a little bit more effective and time sensitive for the teaching community, who are very thinly stretched. So why parents? I mean, it's sort of obvious that why are we engaging as parents, but why are we engaging as parents as a climate organisation? First and foremost, it's who we are. There's an authenticity to that, and parenting, motherhood, mothering, fathering is a really important identity for a lot of people. So if you can talk to people as parents, as mothers, as fathers, then you're potentially reaching them very effectively, and potentially reaching concerned but not engaged audiences. So there's a lot of parents out there who will say they're concerned about climate, but they're not currently engaged on doing anything about climate. And that ability to reach new audiences is something that people think about a lot in the climate space, is how do we reach beyond the existing climate bubble? There's also a lot of importance around values-based communication. So there's quite a lot written about values-based communication in all sorts of different spaces, from marketing to climate to all sorts. But if you can talk to people and find a way to connect with them on the basis of their values, then you're much more likely to be able to kind of help them towards behaviour change, and also to connect with people cross-politically. And I'll talk in a minute about some of the research that we've done about values-based communication and cross-political engagement from a parent perspective. There's also the intergenerational concern, which is really politically cross-cutting. Many of the articles that you'll see about climate talk about concern for the future generations. It's a really common framing for anything talking about climate. And that kind of intergenerational concern of wanting to leave a better future for our children, of wanting to keep our kids safe, is something that resonates right the way across the political spectrum. Parents are also everywhere. This is a really large audience to talk to, and parents are powerful as voters, as consumers, as taxpayers, as employees, and as employers. And many of those are areas where youth activists don't have the same space. So many of the youth activists, they're not voters, they're not taxpayers, and they're not employees and employers. And so thinking about what is the power that parents have, what's the ways that we can use those kinds of social power that we have, is really important. But also, when you have mums fighting for something, you'd better watch out, because we're going to win. I think this is a great quote, and I think this really encapsulates a lot of the power that there is in parent climate engagement. And particularly, a lot of this work is led by mothers. Most of the parent climate work is female-led. We've got about 90 to 95% women across all of the parent climate work, and almost all of the leadership of all the parent climate groups I know are women. But we're trying to keep the door open to men, which is why the UK work is parents rather than mothers. There are a number of climate groups that are mother focused, and that's kind of encapsulated in their name. But I think this power is really important, that there is that kind of lioness, protective, guarding power of mothers, of parents. And once parents realise that our kids, all of our kids, are threatened by the climate crisis, there's a real tenacity and power in wanting to keep engaged on this and to work together as a group of parents. Maria Nera is a director of the WHO that some of you may have come across. We've worked with her at COP26 and COP27, and she's been really supportive of bringing the perspective of parents into climate spaces. The evidence base for why we are working on climate as parents has also been really helpful. As we've grown this work and as we've strengthened the work, we've started to think more deeply about what's the power in parent climate engagement. And so some of those pieces, the values-based communication, we've done some research with Climate Outreach, who do really excellent research around how to communicate about climate in different spaces. And in particular, they've done some research onto segmented audiences. So looking at the different audiences in the UK and how you can talk about climate to some of those different political audiences. And we did research with them about how to use messaging that might come from a parent climate perspective to reach different political audiences. And that was really helpful in confirming our expectation that if you're talking about intergenerational concern, if you're talking about protection for future generations or intergenerational togetherness, there is a real potential to reach right the way across the political spectrum, from conservative voters through to kind of activist communities, but with some kind of nuance in how you can use language to reach some of those different audiences. So that research was really rich in not just underlining the potential of this work, but also giving us some granularity in how can we use some of this to reach some of those different audiences. And then there's the importance of social comparison to make people change behaviour. And I've put a link to an article here, and we can obviously share these slides. So this was a recent article in Scientific American, but there's been a lot of research around behaviour change. But this one was showing very clearly that out of a number of different things that you might look at that could cause people to change behaviour, social comparison is the number one reason why people are going to change their behaviour. And that came out far higher than financial incentives or appeals to act. We are a social species, and we look to what others around us are doing to take our benchmark for how we behave. And that peer pressure and ability of people to talk to their friends, to their neighbours, I think is a really significant way to get people to change their behaviour or to change their level of engagement around climate. And then that links really well to the social connectedness of parents. I think we all know that parents end up being very deeply socially connected. We're connected to our communities, the school communities, to friendship networks, to older and younger generations. And this was underlined by this piece of research that Families for a Future did last year with Climate Advocacy Lab. This was US-based research, but they showed that parents of school-age children are the most socially connected age of any demographic group that they were looking at, not just age group, but it was parents of school-age children irrespective of the age of the parents. And that, I think, underlines the potential for parents as a highly socially connected group to be able to influence other people's behaviours, to be able to think about that social comparison if you can get parents communicating about climate. Moments of change is a reference to behaviour change research about when you get moments in people's lives when people are making significant changes, be that moving job, moving house, or having a child. There are moments when people are much more likely to make significant shifts in how they engage in the world and kind of the values basis that they're engaging around. And that's changing what you're buying, what your consumption looks like, what your levels of political engagement might look like. So there are these kind of opportunities, and early parenthood is a really significant one. We see a lot of parents that come to join the parent climate movement who are parents of very young children, which I think reflects that moments of change piece. But then we also see parents of older children who are waking up to the climate crisis at different stages. And I think in particular, jumping over intergenerational influence for a moment, the youth mental health crisis is a reason why a lot of parents come and engage in the parent climate movement. The youth mental health crisis and link to climate and eco-anxiety is really, really significant. So there have been a number of big reports about the extent of eco-anxiety and how that's affecting young people. There was one report last year which looked at UK youth only, which reported 70% of young people in the UK who are experiencing eco-anxiety to some extent and who are afraid for their future. If you look globally, that rises to 84%. So 84% of young people around the world are reporting that they're feeling concerned about the climate crisis and concerned about the environment that they're going to grow into. That is absolutely enormous numbers of children, 4 in 5 children globally. That's kids in every school, in every class, friends of all of our children, or our own children. So that's something that I think we as parents need to understand, need to recognize that there is this significant link between youth mental health and eco-anxiety, and that one of the best ways to support young people through eco-anxiety is for parents to take action, because it's very disempowering for young people if they are really deeply concerned about the climate and ecological crisis and they see the adults in their lives not taking that seriously and not acting to protect them. So the youth mental health crisis is one reason why parents get involved in taking action around the climate crisis. And then just to come back to the intergenerational influence, there's a number of pieces of research around the influence that children have on their parents around voting behaviour, but there's also some research around the influence that an adult generation can have on older voters. So there are these really significant influences between different age groups around voting patterns and political engagement. And parents are a kind of bridge generation. So there's this potential for parents to take some of the concerns of youth activists or young people concerned about the climate crisis with suffering eco-anxiety, etc., and communicate that to different age groups and help different age groups to translate that into some kind of political engagement. So who are Parents for Future UK? As I said, we were founded in February 2019, inspired by the Fridays for Future and the UK school strike movement. We're climate focused. We're the largest parent climate movement in the UK. In 2022, our reach was over 10 million, and that includes media, so not all of that's very actively engaged, but reach. And then engagement was over 200,000. We combine national campaigning with local organising. We've got 21 plus local groups. I'm not quite sure what the number is because more groups keep cropping up at the moment. And it fluctuates depending on the levels of engagement in different groups. And there is huge potential to reach schools through that membership, both the local organising membership plus the actively engaged national membership that we have. We have a lot of parents within our communities who join and want to do something in their schools. So there is huge potential to do a lot more schools engagement work through the networks we have. We have a small part-time funded team for Parents for Future UK, and we have a large volunteer network that we support. And we will be relaunching later this month. So this is interesting timing to be presenting what we're doing, but we've just been through the process of a rebrand. We've got a new website coming and we've got new platforms that we're moving across to. So it's going to be an interesting few months as we relaunch and move into a period of what we hope will be significant movement growth for Parents for Future UK. We're also connected to global parent climate organising. I mentioned this early on, but there's 2 main networks of parent climate groups internationally, Parents for Future Global and Our Kids Climate, both of which I'm closely connected to. They provide spaces to connect people who are doing climate organising from a parent or intergenerational perspective around the world. And that is 40 plus countries at the moment. There's also a lot of intergenerational collaboration there. And one of the programs that I've helped set up is a fellowship program to support leaders of parent climate organisations, but also groups that are doing intergenerational organising. And I think that intergenerational collaboration is really important, particularly when you see increasing potential for divisions between youth activists or youth generations and parent generations. When you're talking about some of this activism and organising work, there is the potential to build those bridges and to have that kind of collaborative working. With the global work, we've brought together parents from all sorts of different countries to be able to have a powerful presence at COP26 in Glasgow and COP27 last year in Egypt. And both of those have had a significant focus on clean air. Air pollution is a key issue that the parent climate movement focuses on globally. And the countries that I've listed there are 4 that came immediately to my mind where I know there's a lot of work going on around air pollution. It looks quite different in different contexts, and I'm very happy to talk a bit more about what some of that work looks like. But it is an issue that obviously resonates right the way across the world, that air pollution is affecting communities in all sorts of different places. And we see that a lot of that is reflected in the organising and in some of the kind of key campaigns that the parent climate movement is delivering. This is a very briefly kind of what we are doing with the UK parent climate movement. So engaging and empowering parents through connection and community to campaign for system change and build resilience. Campaigning is really important. So we are combining a campaigning piece of the work alongside building communities, and connecting people to each other is really important in helping people feel less lonely and less afraid to engage on climate issues. And that's a significant barrier to a lot of parents that are worried about climate and environmental issues, but unless they feel connected to others, they don't know what to do, and they feel worried to step outside their comfort zone. So we build emotional support into the work. That's really important to support parents and children in response to eco-anxiety. And how is this all linked to clean air? So fossil fuel campaigning is a really important element of our work. That's one of the main campaign strands for the UK work and also for the global work. And air quality is obviously very closely linked to fossil fuel campaigning. Fossil fuels are a big factor in why we have the poor air quality. They're not the only factor. You have obviously got wildfires and things that are affecting air quality in different parts of the world, but it's a significant factor. So thinking about clean air or air quality and health impacts is a way to make a bridge between fossil fuel campaigning, which can often feel quite intangible and quite far away, and impacts that people are seeing in their daily lives, impacts within people's homes or on the walk to school. So it's an engagement opportunity. It's a way that we can talk about some of these big campaign issues that we're wanting to engage parents around and make that much more tangible to people in their lives. As we all know, air quality affects all communities, but there are worse impacts on more disadvantaged communities. And then there are big campaigns around things like school streets, which we've been involved with in different ways in different spaces. And then domestic air quality, we've just been doing some scoping work around domestic air quality and indoor air quality, particularly gas stoves work. And then global solidarity. So air quality is something that affects people around the world, and being able to work on an issue in the UK where we can directly connect that to what people are experiencing in Delhi or in Poland or wherever else it might be, that's really good for us to be able to build those bridges. And the personal stories. And I'm thinking some of you are likely to recognise who this is. This is Ella Adu Kissi-Deborah, who was a young girl who died aged 11 as a result of asthma, and that asthma was exacerbated by air quality. Her mum is one of the people that was in one of the photos higher up, Rosamond, who is an extraordinary campaigner who's turned her grief as a parent into her campaigning power to be able to tell Ella's story. And she's campaigned for Ella to be the first person in the world to have air pollution listed on her death certificate as a cause of death. Those personal stories are incredibly powerful in helping illustrate what the impacts of air pollution look like. Ella will not be the only child that dies from air pollution, but to be able to tell stories as parents, I think, is immensely powerful and is a really kind of strong reason why parents should have space in talking about air pollution and air quality.
Thanks so much, Rowan. So as I said, I'm Claire, and I'm going to talk to you about Parents for Future Scotland. So we're a lot less developed than the UK. We've been going a lot less time as well. So we've been running for 18 months, and we have a steering group of 9 people that kind of influence the direction of our work. And we've got 60 very active members in a WhatsApp group. And then we have kind of people that are in communication with us through Twitter and Facebook. So when we started 18 months ago, we didn't really quite know what we were going to hone in on as a group, but we found that 2 of our steering group members were teachers, and they felt that there were a lot of resources, education resources around climate, but a lot of the resources actually focused on individual responsibility rather than trying to enact power to change systems. So we felt that we would try to adapt some packs to ensure that it's showing children how to enact their power, and then also that we would do parent talks. As Rowan said, school communities are kind of mini communities in and of themselves. Actually going into the space where parents are can be quite powerful, and holding spaces where it's kind of peer-to-peer, so it's parents talking to parents. There's nobody's an expert in that room. But it's a place where people can kind of come together in an open, connective space, discuss their concerns, discuss impacts of climate change and how and what kind of powers they have in order to address them. So the first packs that we did were in the lead up to COP26, and they were based on a campaign called Our Other Mother. Now, Our Other Mother had been done by Parents for Future UK and Our Kids Climate, and they had invited artists, famous artists, to do artwork inspired by their love of Mother Earth. And so this is some of the artwork that the artists produced. So we took this artwork and we created education packs with it, asking children to contribute to this campaign by making their own pictures, which depict their love of Mother Earth. And we displayed it around Glasgow in the run up to COP26 in community spaces, in cafes, and Our Kids Climate and Parents for Future UK helped us to blow up some of the children's images and put it in a very large disused space in a shopping centre. And we also kind of flyered to ask people to come along and help petition over COP26. So here's some of the lovely pictures that the children did. And we also had an online space where children could upload their pictures, and it's kind of an online gallery. It's still online just now. This year we're concentrating on doing air pollution as a topic. So we've taken the packs adapted from Global Action Plan, and the education packs invite children to monitor air pollution around about their school community, and then to think about the powers that they have in order to do something about it. So they can write to their MP, or they can look at active travel plans around their school, or they can create posters, just whatever the children want to do. And then we're also doing parent speaker talks where parents can come in and think about air pollution and the effects of air pollution on their children and how to address air pollution within their local schools. The idea really of doing this at the same time is that often when children are enthused by a topic and they come home and talk about it with parents might be more inclined to actually come in and have a conversation within the parent talk space. Because again, we are kind of a gateway organisation. We're trying to get people that aren't involved in tackling climate issues to become involved. So we have a rolling parent speaker programme where we've got kind of 3 trainings set out over the year so that any parents can come on board and train to be parent speakers. And we're targeting areas of diversity. So as Rowan said, we're kind of aware that sometimes the climate movement is not very diverse. The great thing about schools is that you can target areas of diversity. And so that's kind of our strategy in terms of doing this. So just to tell you where the campaign is just now, we are just literally finishing off the education packs and the parent talks. So we're going to launch them after the summer. And at the end of the year of delivering the education packs and the parent talks, we're asking parents and children to vote for measures that they want to see Glasgow City enact, Glasgow City Council enact. So So the measures are, they can choose between free joined up public transport, which is part of an existing campaign called Get Glasgow Moving. So buses in this city are actually more expensive than buses in London or many buses across the UK. So this is saying that, you know, we want one public transport system that's free and accessible to all, or children and parents can vote for an active travel coordinator. So this person would be like a lollipop lady or man who would facilitate children to get to and from school in an active way, maybe through facilitating walking buses or cycling buses before and after school, and they'd be paid. Or they can vote for bikes for all and cycle lanes. So we've got the infrastructure and the means with which to use bicycles. Or they can vote for road closures to be extended, as Rowan has said, as part of the school streets. So that has been rolled out. I think I've actually not necessarily specified, although it's been implicit, but this campaign is based in Glasgow, although we have members from across Scotland. This campaign is based in Glasgow. So in Glasgow, the school road closures have taken place in some schools, but not all, and it's normally at drop-off and pick-up times. So we're looking at perhaps asking to extend the amount of schools and also the duration from perhaps 8 o'clock until 3:30 at least. And then also children and parents can vote for parking fines and reduced speed limits in order to disincentivise driving in the city. So at the end of the year, we plan to take the children and the parents to Glasgow City Council and present the parts of this campaign that the children and parents want to ask for. So they'll go to Glasgow City Council and ask for specific changes that they have voted on over the year. But as well, we want our parent talks. Our parent talks aren't just about this campaign, but they are about kind of welcoming parents to a community where they can start to feel their power and enact change in their own lives. So we have bi-monthly cycles which parents and families can come on, and they're right in the city centre and streets that you would never really cycle with your young children, but they're just 1.5 miles. There's enough of us that it closes down the streets, and we work with cycling organisations to support families to access bikes and also to support families to learn how to cycle if they need to. And we also have done information evenings on setting up walking and cycling buses. So these are parents who have already set up walking and cycling buses, talking to other parents who want to. And we have written advice as well on how to set up walking and cycling buses in Glasgow specifically, because there are people in the council that will help with risk assessments and things like that. As I've said, we've got a rolling programme of parent speaker training, and anyone can become a parent speaker once they undergo the training. And then another outcome quite often of doing parent talks is that many parents have set up eco groups as a consequence of us talking with them. So parent eco groups would be groups that just support the school to become more environmentally friendly, and they can do it through many different things, through perhaps uniform recycling, supporting planting schemes, looking at waste management, looking at pesticides around the schools. It really depends on the interests of the parents and the specific location of the school. But as part of this, it's also a way for parents to really learn their power. So I think a lot of parents that are disengaged might find kind of being part of a campaign quite a big jump, but schools are co-created by parents, and so parents are quite used to having a say in the way that things are run. So we've seen that this is a journey for parents where parents start to have a say in their school, and then they start to want to have a say in their community, and then parents can begin to campaign as well. And then lastly, the last project that we're working on is in conjunction with the Lost Woods, which is a programme that kind of does rewilding with children. So they created the first children's wood just after lockdown by planting 600,000 trees just outside of Glasgow with all the children from all schools in Glasgow. And now they want to rewild Hope Street, which is one of the most polluted streets in the whole of Scotland. So we're talking about engaging 10 school communities around about Hope Street and providing education packs and also parent talks, but also workshops and working with other organisations to provide that, and then bringing everyone together, families and children at the end, to rewild one block of Hope Street in a kind of David and Goliath type story. So I'm just going to pass now over to Rowan again.
Thanks, Claire. I love hearing about the work you're doing in Glasgow. So I just wanted to talk briefly about how to grow this work, because it feels like still there's a huge potential to do more schools engagement work, and schools engagement work that has got a link to air quality as part of that. The UK team, Parents for Future UK team, is at this point of expanding right now. We're just going through a relaunch. We're just expanding. We're recruiting a campaigner, and there's been a couple of other recruitment positions recently. And we are in a position to be able to support a much broader community more effectively. So supporting more of the local organising, supporting more of the parents that are joining the Parents for Future communities and wanting to do schools engagement. And we've got parents across the country who are ready to do a lot more. They're wanting to do engagement through schools, through other parts of local communities, through councils, with MPs, etc. But there is a real need for training, for support and coordination for those parents. So we see that parents need quite a lot of support to understand what is possible in their communities, to feel that they're confident enough to be able to start something up. There's a need for some mentoring and some hand-holding in the early stages before parents can really kind of run and take on projects for themselves. That looks really different in different communities in different parts of the country. We have some people join who are just, you know, straight getting involved and setting something up, and that's brilliant. But we see quite a lot of people who are a bit more hesitant and wanting to do more, but needing a bit more encouragement to be able to do so. So we are at the moment fundraising. We're looking for some more funding, both for the Scottish team. So Claire is starting to get tiny amounts of funding in for the Scottish work, but almost all of that has been done voluntarily so far, with occasional small micro grants to support, you know, specific costs. And also we're looking for some more funding for national coordination of the schools work. So the schools work is something that we haven't currently got funding for the national coordination of Parents for Future UK. We've been able to fundraise for campaigning work more easily than we have for schools engagement work, because that's where there's funding in the climate space. But we see this still as a real area where there's a lot of potential. And so anybody that has any suggestions around how we might be able to better resource this work, we're all ears, because we really do want to grow this and we can see the potential to have a lot of impact here. And that might be the end of the slides, I think. I think it's probably just any questions from there on.
Thank you. Thank you both very much. It was really fascinating and really good to hear what you're doing. We have some questions or comments in the chat. So let me start with those. So the first question is from Anna Orridge. And she says, I agree that schools are a great way to engage the wider community. I work for a London multi-academy trust that mostly serves relatively deprived communities. We found that because of the financial and time pressures, parents are less able to engage with environmental action in this way. Have you found a way around this?
I mean, yeah, it's a great question. And I think this speaks to the kind of layers of privilege that there are to be able to engage, to have the time to be able to engage in environmental activism and to be able to engage in unpaid work. And a huge amount of this work is unpaid work that's being done by women. This is majority women's work that's being put in, women's time that's being put into growing the parent climate movement. And that's part of why we've been putting a lot of effort into starting to fundraise, to be able to support people so that we can do this work in a way that's a bit more sustainable and to be able to diversify the movement. And I think that's an important element, is to be able to support people, more people financially, who are able to engage and do some of this organising work. I think we haven't got a perfect solution, and I think lots of groups across the climate movement are really struggling to find ways to engage communities where there are economic issues, deprivation, etc., which is obviously national. We're in a cost of living crisis, and it's really hard for people to find time to engage on issues as a volunteer. But we've been experimenting. So Claire, I'll pass to you in a minute, and you might want to talk about some of the ways that you've been engaging in some of the more deprived areas in Glasgow. But we're looking to experiment with this over the next year, to experiment with how to engage different types of school communities in different parts of the country. And I think we're looking to kind of develop some different models just to understand what is possible. How can we package some of this work so that it's really easy to digest? How can we provide support that genuinely helps people in different types of communities to engage and to engage through school communities. But Claire, you've had some successes and are having some successes in parts of Glasgow, so maybe you'd like to share about that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think in terms of deprivation, where it's very difficult to engage people. It's obviously Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so you can only really kind of address one need once you've had your basic needs met. But I mean, certainly our parent speaker programme is actually quite successful in terms of I think going into schools where there's different kinds of diversity, and speaking to parents who, I mean, yes, the parents that have had the time or do have can kind of come along to those talks, and yes, that is a privilege. But we're finding then that some parents from more diverse backgrounds are wanting to then train to become parent speakers themselves. And I think that actually just empowering parents from different backgrounds to do these talks and hold these spaces is the key to developing a movement that's more diverse, because it needs to come from these communities themselves. But yeah, I mean, I think in my charity, the charity that I work for, works with families that are experiencing severe deprivation, and I wouldn't look to work with those families currently because they are experiencing such a level of need that I don't think that addressing the climate crisis is a place where they can they can't meet that at the moment. But I certainly would go into schools where those families are, because it's a diverse range of needs that people have, and so there are people who are less affluent, who have less time, but are still concerned and want to have a say. And so I think it's really, really important to give as many opportunities as you can. We're also starting to condense down, just have we're getting a journalist to take some key articles and key protests, and just having an admin Mondays where people can just go in and sign on to petitions, or do very, very quick things. If you only have 5 minutes in a week, that's something you could do. And just recognizing that people don't have a lot of time, but there's a lot of will there to try and change things.
Yeah, thank you. There's another question here from Laura Fatah saying, have you had any engagement with the MPs or any response from government, I guess, in some broad sense?
Yes, MP engagement is a big piece of what we're doing, of trying to encourage people to engage with the democratic institutions as they are, flawed as they are. So yes, we encourage people to write to MPs on a fairly regular basis on a lot of different issues, but particularly around fossil fuel campaigning. And some of that has involved groups meeting with MPs. Some of the groups have developed really good relationships with MPs where they're in regular contact and having conversations. Some of the MPs are a little harder to reach, as we can all well imagine, which can be really frustrating, I think, really getting people to understand how difficult it is to get what are meant to be our elected representatives to actually respond and have a meeting if you might have an opinion that doesn't directly align with theirs, can be really frustrating. But yeah, encouraging people to engage more with MPs is really central to the work. And that's going to be a big piece of the work that we're doing over the next couple of years. So we're all starting to look towards the next general election, which is going to be a significant moment in this country, however that pans out. And helping parents be able to have conversations about climate feels like a really important piece of that. And that's going to be within school communities, on the doorstep with family and friends, in workplaces, etc. So that's a piece that we're working with partner organisations at the moment to make sure that we can help people feel confident having conversations, not as experts, but just go and talk about this, because talking about climate issues really is impactful when you come back to that behaviour change research that talked about seeing how other people are engaging is a thing that helps influence people to change their behaviour, and that peer pressure and social connectedness of parents. So there's going to be a lot more MP engagement work coming up, and a lot of that we do in partnership with other organisations. So this year we've been part of a campaign called Warm This Winter, which is a coalition campaign which brings together climate organisations, but also fuel poverty organisations. And that's involved a lot of MP engagement. We had a big campaign around Christmas of people across the country sending Christmas cards to their local MPs. And we've worked on a number of other campaigns, but we're not policy experts. So we tend to do that kind of policy engagement work in partnership with organisations that have got that expertise, so they know in more detail who's the right MP to target to talk about this specific thing, or which government department do we need to be putting pressure on, and how can we then mobilise our community to be able to engage around that.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question myself, really, because one of the things when you talk about the climate crisis, of course, it's a huge topic. You know, I mean, there's all sorts of things from melting of Arctic ice to air pollution in a school and everything in between. And so how do you decide what your kind of priorities are? How do you make that kind of judgment? Is that locally based, or do you how do you not spread yourself so thinly that nothing gets done, I guess is what I'm asking.
Did I see you wanting to jump in, Claire? You can come in a minute. It's a real challenge, I think, trying to make sure that we're playing to our strengths and not trying to do everything, and trying to identify spaces where parents have got a unique voice feels like a really important piece. So finding how can we engage people, and our work is around engagement, around how can we bring more people into the climate space. So identifying opportunities where we can bring more people in and get more people engaged by finding kind of specific campaigns that we can communicate effectively, that we can draw people into. And then people will often go on to engage in other spaces as well. We're not trying to be the only space that parents engage in on climate issues, but often once they've taken that step to connect with some other parents and realize that they're not alone, then that's often enough to help spark them feeling more confident to go and engage in their workplace or in their home community or the school community or whatever. So that's why the building communities has been a really important piece of what we're doing. But fossil fuels has been really central to the campaigning work so far, because changing the energy system that we have feels fundamentally like that's a thing that we all need to be putting some energy into. And although it's really obvious, I think, to all of us that we need to move away from fossil fuels, that's absolutely not what our governments are doing right now. They're continuing to invest in fossil fuels. And so we all do need to be putting some energy into that and making sure that if we get government change, then we do get some firm commitments and get some shifts on energy security and different energy policies. But there is also flexibility. So local groups do decide what feels important to them at local level. And then we're connecting that up to a national campaign when it feels appropriate for local groups to join up to something that's a national campaign, or with the global work, global campaigns, particularly around some of the COP work and air quality.
Well, thank you very much. It's coming up to the end of the hour, so I think it's time to stop. There are no other questions in the chat anyway, but I think it's been a really fantastic to learn about what you're doing, and along with a couple of the comments, I certainly agree that what you're doing is very inspirational, and I hope that there will be ways we can continue our conversation with Tapas. One of the things that we're concerned about is engaging the school community, and of course that does include parents, and so perhaps we'll continue this. And for everybody, just to note that with this presentation will be on our website. Kat's put the link in the chat, and also to say that if you'd like to join our network and receive our monthly newsletter, there's a link for that too, or you can contact Kat directly, and her email is in the chat as well. So I think this brings to the end. Also
in the presentation, so if you do want to reach out, please do.
Yeah, and I'm sure we will, actually. We've been working, I mean, just as a side note, we've been working quite closely with Global Action Plan as well. And in fact, we have a workshop scheduled with them in July to talk more about messaging about air pollution in schools. So I think there's a lot of common ground here that we should perhaps explore more. So that brings to the end this this series of our lunchtime seminars. We now take a break for the summer. Thank you all of you who've attended these seminars. I hope you've enjoyed them as much as I have. And I'd like to thank again, particularly Rowan and Claire, for a very wonderful final presentation today. And enjoy a very warm and pleasant summer, I hope. Okay, bye-bye.